Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, April 24th, 2015. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We've got lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick program note, in response to all the emails we've been getting, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us again in our third hour with her unique perspective on events going around the world today. So you've got that to look forward to. Now then, turning quickly to Russia and Ukraine, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat, tweeted out that Russia's military is expanding its presence in eastern Ukraine, and he posted a photo of a Buk surface-to-air missile system. And, of course, it took about, 3 minutes, the little egg timer's going on that one, for people to recognize the photo as actually being 2 years old and taken at an air show near Moscow. So they're back to the same old thing, grab a picture, put it out, say, oh, this proves Russia's the bad guy. And just as quickly, these propaganda stunts get shot down. Apparently, there are still some people within the United States government who do not understand that the availability of the Internet and the independent media has fundamentally changed the way information flows through society. And in this day and age of the Internet, the lifespan of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer. That's why we have this one sitting right here. Now, we are hearing from Life News in Russia that Ukraine's Ministry of Defense is preparing for renewed military operations in Donbass. They're getting ready to uncork on those people for the crime of not wanting to labor under a government not of their own choosing. And apparently Ukrainian forces have opened fire on the latest Russian humanitarian aid convoy. We reported yesterday that Russia had sent in more food and medical supplies to the people in the eastern Ukrainian republics. And Ukraine is now basically trying to blow all of that stuff up to impose collective starvation on the people of eastern Ukraine, which, by the way, is a war crime. Now, a lot of people have been talking about fast-tracking Ukraine's membership in NATO. We've got to get Ukraine in NATO. We've got to get them locked into the ECB and the EU. We've got to keep them away from Russia, which is, of course, the reason for last year's U.S.-backed coup d'etat in the first place. Because all during 2013, the European Union had been making overtures for Ukraine to merge with them. And toward the end of 2013, Ukraine was saying, well, look, we've got this offer from Europe. We got this other offer from Russia. The deal from Russia is a lot better. We're going to go with them. Next thing you know, all of these mercenaries are in Kiev shooting people, blaming the elected government for it to drive them out of power and installed the junta, which promptly obeyed its masters and shackled Ukraine to the European Union, and they've been talking about NATO. But there's a problem. The German media is out there observing that under the NATO treaty, the fact that Ukraine is currently in a military conflict, bringing Ukraine into NATO would activate the clause on collective defense and immediately commit all of the NATO nations to go to war against eastern Ukraine and potentially Russia. I think that would be a bad thing. And certainly the Europeans are chilling on this idea of a new world war fought on their front yards, because they've already been through it twice. Now, over in Armenia, they're marking the 100th anniversary of the Ottoman massacres and genocides. And here we are 100 years later, and we still have all these various groups saying it was a genocide. No, it wasn't. Only Israel has genocides and Holocaust. That's just death in force or something like that. And they're going back and forth, but they are marking that. And it is a reminder, sadly, tragically, that mass executions of people are not a single phenomenon confined to Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. It has happened throughout history and sadly probably will continue to do so. Now, here's an interesting little story. It has come out that the United States government has built a replica of Iran's nuclear facilities in Tennessee. The official story is it's going to help us gain an edge in negotiations. And apparently this is actually a working uranium enrichment plant using centrifuges liberated from Libya following that war. And they're out there saying, well, by studying all of this, we will have a better understanding of the technical requirements for the P5+1. I personally think they're trying to work out additional ways to sabotage the Iranian systems. And we know they've already tried with Stuxnet. And apparently the possibility of causing a nuclear disaster like another Chernobyl in the middle of Iran is not too great a price to pay to make sure that Iran doesn't get the nuclear bomb, even though nobody can actually prove they're getting one. Joe Biden is actually out there grabbing his moment in the media sunshine. He's out there vowing that he will not back any Iran deal unless Iran's security concerns are answered. And he's basically out there promising to give Israel brand new F-35 warplanes to maintain a qualitative edge. Obviously, Joe Biden has not actually been paying close attention to the F-35 and all of its myriad problems. But it almost sounds like Joe Biden is starting to give vent to wishful thinking that if the Mossad were to assassinate Obama, then he, Joe Biden, would get the Oval Office and serve Israel and run for re-election in 2016, which would certainly be a serious encumbrance to Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, there's a very interesting article that came out of Middle East Monitor about Benjamin Netanyahu's fantasy, where they're basically calling him on his constant screaming and shouting hysterics about the threat of Iran to the world. Iran is the foremost sponsor of terrorism. Iran's march of conquest, subjugation, and terror. And I actually got an email from somebody saying Netanyahu is projecting. And that's exactly what's going on, because Iran minds its own business. They have not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years, which stands in stark contrast to Israel and the United States, which these days can't seem to go for more than 3 or 4 months without bombing or drone striking or overthrowing some other nation. And remember, Iran is playing by the rules. They signed and ratified the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, so did the United States. And everything Iran is doing, they're allowed to do under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nobody's found any evidence that they're doing anything not covered by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Meanwhile, you have Israel, which we now know is a nuclear-armed state, has been since the 1970s. The U.S. was helping them design hydrogen bombs, giving them weapons-grade uranium. So was France, so was Germany, funding all of this stuff. Israel still refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, still will not allow IAEA inspections, was caught trying to sell a clandestine nuclear weapon to the former government of South Africa, the very activity the NNPT is supposed to be preventing. So you have Israel, which is a nuclear-armed state. They're not helpless. They're not victims. Nobody's going to attack them. And they're not playing by the rules, pointing the finger of guilt at Iran, which is playing by the rules, isn't attacking anybody, isn't building nuclear weapons, and trying to convince us that Iran are the bad guys and we've got to all go kill them and send our children off to be killed and crippled in the process here. Now, another part of the fantasy of Netanyahu and also the United States government is they're out there trying to put the blame for the deteriorating situation in Yemen on Iran. All last week we were hearing about the Iranian warships on their way to Yemen, and finally yesterday we got actual photos of the Iranian warships, and they turned out to be cargo ships carrying humanitarian aid. And the reality is that Iran is not arming the Yemenite rebels. The weapons are being acquired and sent in by ousted Yemen President Saleh. He wants his job back. The people of Yemen want him back. They want their U.S. puppet ruler out. And the U.S. is going into Yemen using Saudi Arabia as a proxy to slap those Yemenite people around and say, look, once you're a conquered province of the American empire, you stay conquered. You're not allowed to just go off and change your mind. What would the world be if every country was running its own government for its own people? It would be utter chaos. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, up in Iraq, the people of Iraq are trying to kick out all the various forces meddling in their country. And they keep finding foreign weapons in these ISIS positions. And the article I'm looking at primarily is focusing on the fact they keep finding Israeli-manufactured weapons in these ISIS bases. Kind of makes you think, along with the fact that ISIS all over the world and the world's worst fanatical Muslim supervillains never seem to attack Israel's interests anywhere. And don't forget, it wasn't that long ago. Somebody got photographs of IDF, uniformed IDF, handing weapons and supplies to ISIS in Syria. It's a made-up group, like George Orwell's Emmanuel Goldstein. So the U.S. government now has an excuse to invade countries that have not actually done anything to us. Oh, we're not really invading Iraq for the third time. We have to go after ISIS. We're not really invading Syria. We have to go after ISIS. It's sort of a whack-a-mole. Wherever they want to go to war, they send in the actors and the video production crew. Oh, ISIS is there. We must go after them. Now, every time some of these ISIS or Al-Qaeda groups are caught with U.S.-made weapons, the Pentagon has the same excuse. Oh, we lost those. We misplaced them. I mean, you know how easy it is to misplace things. Your car keys, you know, you miss your cell phone and everything. We're talking, of course, like $500 million in weapons they claim to have mislaid in the Middle East and is now in the hands of Al-Qaeda. That's an awful lot of hardware, even at military prices. $500 million. But that's the official story. Anytime ISIS or Al-Qaeda shows up using U.S.-made weapons, oh, we lost those, really. Our bad. You know, you can see we're blushing and how silly it was. We lost all that stuff, you know. We'll do better in the future here. Now, under the heading of, gee, I hate it when I'm right all the time, yesterday we were reporting on how a bottle rocket got fired from just inside the fence of Gaza to just over the fence into Israel, hit a dirt lot, did not cause any damage, did not injure anybody. This is a familiar pattern. Anytime the Security Council starts talking about restarting the peace process to recognize Israel and Palestine, Israel panics, and they carry out a false flag attack, because especially right now, following Netanyahu's grandstanding before the U.S. Congress, the White House and the State Department have made it clear Israel should not bet on any more U.S. vetoes in the Security Council of resolutions concerning Israel. So the only way they can head off a new peace process is to restart the war. And they fling this little rocket, little Israeli agent provocateur flings a rocket over into an empty lot, and all of a sudden Israel, oh, we're under attack. We've got to defend ourselves. And sure enough, Israel is starting to attack sites in Gaza in response to the terror rocket attack. It was horrible. The dust balls were flying everywhere. Over by Nablus, 100 armed Israeli settlers are raiding Palestinian villages. They're attacking not only the Palestinians, they're destroying the olive groves. And that is a very significant hurt because it takes 10 years of farming. After planting an olive tree, it's 10 years before you get a crop that can be harvested and sold. And so the Israeli settlers, in destroying all the olive groves, they're basically trying to destroy the economic foundation of the Palestinians to drive them out. Alrighty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call here. Brian in Pennsylvania. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
All right, this has nothing to do with what you're talking about. I wanted to call in yesterday, but I didn't get a chance. Yesterday it was like 45 degrees, and it was like 28 degrees at night. I'm in the middle of Pennsylvania, and we were getting some of that white, lumpy rain.
Gosh darn that human-caused global warming. Yeah, I think it was something like 23 of the 50 states got snow yesterday, and they're still out there. And in fact, they're already backing off on this stuff about global warming. I've got a very interesting, revealing article out of Duke University that we're going to get to when we get to the global warming section.
All right, that was all I wanted to say. I wanted to call in yesterday, but I didn't get a chance.
All right, well, thank you very much for the update, and we're going to let you go here. Now, over at antiwar.com, Pat Robertson has an article, Why is Yemen Our War? And basically going out there with this unfortunately very naive and blinkered view about, yeah, we've got the Saudis are going in there, all this destruction. It's not even a rich nation. It's not even worth conquering. So why all of a sudden is Yemen's civil war America's war? What did the Houthis do to us? Well, it's not Yemen's civil war. It is the backlash to an American coup d'etat. And what Mr. Robertson does not seem to comprehend is, back in 2012, the United States intervened in Yemen to kick out the legitimate government that wanted to rule Yemen for the benefit of Yemen, and they installed a U.S. puppet, Hadi, that ruled Yemen for the benefit of American corporations. Now, this is something the United States has done continuously since the end of World War II. They have tried to overthrow the government of some 50 different nations. They've succeeded about half the time. Some of the successes include Cuba in 1952, Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973, Egypt in 2013, when they kicked out Morsi, who was the put in after Mubarak, a previous U.S. puppet ruler, was taken down. Now, Obama, up until very recently, was bragging about what a success for U.S. interventionism Yemen had been. But that old model of intervention is starting to fall apart, because this process only works when the people of a nation are willing to follow the new junta as they followed the previous leaders. But that's starting to break down. The people of Cuba kicked out their U.S. puppet in 1959. Iran kicked out their U.S. puppet, the Shah, in 1979. The people of eastern Ukraine responded to the U.S.-backed coup in Kiev by simply breaking off and trying to go their own way. So now down in Yemen, the people are tired of the U.S. puppet Hadi, and they want their own President Saleh back. And Saleh very clearly wants his job back. The American empire, alarmed at how those pesky conquered provinces are refusing to stay conquered, is going to make an example of Yemen, one of the poorest nations in the Middle East, that you accept and love your U.S. puppet ruler, or bad things will happen to you, such as starvation blockades and the bombing of civilians and civilian infrastructure. And I hope that will clear things up for Mr. Roberts, who doesn't seem to understand what's really going on around the globe and why there are so many wars right now, just waiting to gel together into World War III. Now, we've been talking about these transatlantic and transpacific trade partnerships. These are raw deals for Americans and American businesses, raw deal for freedom of speech. They're trying to ban GMO labeling in all these other countries so that you will eat your GMO stuff and you will like it, and whereby Monsanto will profit from it. And now there's a new wrinkle, which we will talk about when we come back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about these giant trade treaties, the Trans-Pacific Pact, the Transatlantic Investment and Trade Pact, and they've been given fast-track status by the Congress. They're basically telling Obama, just get these things done and out of here. We're not going to interfere. And the reason for the rush job is becoming apparent, because more and more of these provisions are being leaked out. And they are absolutely devastating, both to our nation's economy, our working class, to the idea of democracy. They are crushing the principles of self-government. These treaties limit the ability of voters and elected representatives to enact laws that might limit the agenda of big corporations. They're talking about all of the signers of these treaties must surrender their own sovereignty to some international body of unelected arbitrators who will decide for us what we can have and not have in our own homes. And we're already seeing that attitude on display down on Maui, because 5 months ago, the voters of Maui overwhelmingly voted no more experimental GMO crops on our home. And we are 5 months later, 2 corrupt judges later. Monsanto is still planting experimental crops down there and just stalling it while they try and lobby a new bill through the Hawaii state government saying, yeah, GMO's just fine. We're just going to plant it all over the place. And they know it's dangerous. If they didn't think there was a risk, they wouldn't be coming all the way out here to Hawaii, because they use Hawaii as a testing ground for this stuff just in case they make a mistake. And they don't want Pollenzilla to get back to the mainland. Of course, we already know that that's not likely adequate safeguard. But here you have a clear example of a corporation's agenda overriding the will of the voters, and that is anti-democratic. That is dictatorship. That is, in fact, fascism. Now we're finding out that some new language has been snuck into these trade bills that would ban any boycotts of Israel, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. These treaties will stipulate that all of the signatory governments will work to block any boycotts of Israel or the businesses operating in the occupied territories. Now, boycotts are a recognized form of peaceful protest. It is protected speech under the First Amendment. But these bills are going to say, absolutely, you will not allow anybody to boycott Israel. Go ahead and boycott the Arabs all you want, but not Israel. Absolutely not. Needless to say, it has sparked a major petition drive on several websites to tell Congress not to vote these trade bills through. And, of course, that would be wonderful if Congress was listening to the American people, but they stopped doing that a long, long time ago. The Eurozone is ratcheting up the pressure on Greece. They're saying there will be no more cash provided until Greece accedes to Europe's reform deal, meaning send the people of Greece back to austerity, work hard, give us more, accept less, because that's the way the bankers want the world. And I think in the long run, especially as the people of Greece are starting to get very angry over the failure of their new government to keep its campaign promises, I think it's building pressure for Greece to simply split off, write off the debt, and pivot over to the Russian sphere of influence. Now, something very strange has happened over at the United States Treasury Department. If you go over to their website, it says the current outstanding U.S. government debt is $18,112,975,000,000. Okay? It has been that way for 40 days. And the number that is showing on the Treasury website is just $25 million below the current legal debt limit. Funny thing. Well, I think the obvious conclusion is the U.S. government has gone way past that debt ceiling and doesn't want you to know about it. And no doubt in the very, very near future, so that it does not become an issue for the 2016 campaign season, there'll be another debate in the Congress about should we raise the debt ceiling. And that's not really the question. They're trying to draw your focus with this false dichotomy. Should we raise the debt ceiling or not? That's not the question that Americans should be asking. The real question, the question they are terrified Americans will start asking, is why, when the Constitution authorizes the federal government to create and issue an interest-free currency, does our government borrow that currency at interest from a privately owned central bank, plunging Americans and future generations into hopelessly unpayable debt? And there really isn't an answer that they can share with you. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. They just have to go back 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, to 1913, when a corrupted Congress and a corrupt president sold the American people back into the slavery of the exact same predatory system of banking we fought a revolution to be free of. Canada's going through the same thing with that whole Comer lawsuit, where the Canadian taxpayers are beginning to realize they have been needlessly taxed to enrich private bankers with the connivance of their own government. Same situation here. The reason the federal government goes on borrowing instantly created out of thin air money from the Federal Reserve, forcing you to pay them trillions in interest, is simply because the Federal Reserve and Wall Street in general are very, very generous campaign contributors every election cycle. That's it. And I'm sure most Americans thinking about that are going to be a little bit less than cheerful, and that's why they don't want you asking that question. They're trying to lure, should we raise the debt ceiling or not? There shouldn't be a debt ceiling. This nation was started with an economic system that did not require going into debt, which is why all the nations with private central banks hated the new United States, immediately set about trying to subvert it. And these private central bankers can and have started wars, assassinated leaders, bought and bribed politicians in order to keep the world enslaved to their little ink and paper empire, which has made the owners of these private central banks immensely wealthy. Current estimate of the Rothschild family fortune is $15 trillion with a T. Go to Google, search images, Rothschild homes, and you will be stunned at the castles they are living in courtesy of your labor. If you have not already read it, there's an article, it's linked permanently at the top of my webpage. It's called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. There's a video out about it. In fact, there's a new DVD out about it. And you need to read that, and you need to share it with your friends. I'm going to post it as a headline on the story this next commercial break. Procter & Gamble sales have fallen for a fifth straight quarter. Procter & Gamble gets a huge amount of their sales from overseas, and the strengthening U.S. dollar is making their products less competitive in foreign markets. And so they're starting to struggle. Declining automobile sales have forced Ford to lay off 700 workers at their Michigan assembly plant. But hey, somehow or other, the American stock market was up in the green for their traditional Friday happy ending. Oh, my goodness here. Let's see. We're coming up here on another commercial break. When we come back, we're going to be getting into the Clintons and corruption, and it's looking like the anti-Hillary fever is beginning to catch on. And a lot of people who were going to wait until the height of the election season, they're starting to pile on now. Maybe that's Hillary's strategy. Try and get the thrashing done now so that next year they can say, oh, this is old news. We've already talked about it. We've already answered it. We've refused to answer any more questions. But her poll numbers are starting to really slide, especially in the swing states. And Mark Rubio is coming on very strong. He's only 2 points behind her right now. So we're going to take break for commercials. I'm going to repost All Wars or Banker Wars to the top of my page, and we'll be right back. America, welcome back to our show here. And before we get into the political stuff here, I'm going to go ahead and grab one more phone call here. Jesse in Ohio. Aloha, Jesse. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was just thinking, been talking a lot about Walmart here recently, and I had a little story you might find comical, if nothing more.
Okay.
My brother's been working in the photo lab at Walmart since they developed film. And
film. What's film? Sorry, I'm just teasing.
Yeah, exactly. He's been there for a while.
Yes.
They had this red button back in the back. It was in a plastic bubble that was locked. No label. Nobody'd ever tell him what that button was for. So he developed this idea that it was a nuclear missile launch button. And it was just a little running joke because nobody would ever tell him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now fast forward years later, this is just a couple of years ago, back 2011, 10, something like that. We was at the Wright-Patton Air Force Museum, and we was in the space exploration where they got the missile silo with all the rockets.
Yes.
He's up on the catwalk, looking down at all the rockets, and my brother says, "Oh my God, look! It's the Walmart logo on the floor of the Wright-Patton Museum in the missile silo."
Mm-hmm.
It's like the button. I told you it was connected to missiles.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I imagine it's a standard item, and I don't know about the photo equipment here, but I do know when I worked at Robert Abel & Associates, we had a button just like that on the computer room wall, and what it was, if something started blowing smoke, you would hit that button, and it cut the power to the entire room so that you didn't damage and lose your computers. Okay?
Right, but this was in a locked bubble. It had a lock on. You couldn't hit it. Nobody could.
Well, in our case, you were supposed to hit the bubble, and the bubble would break. Anyway, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here, and I want to get on to the situation here with the Clintons. Now, we're seeing stories. Even ABC is starting to cover this stuff. The corporate media cannot ignore these any longer, and we're going to keep up the pressure here. Vince Foster, travel office firings, cattle futures trade, Benghazi, more and more and more. We're going to just keep the pressure on there. Well, now they're basically starting to uncover the fact that while Hillary is out there trying to pretend that she was completely isolated from the donations going into the Clinton Foundation while she was Secretary of State, now it's coming out that while she was Secretary of State, Bill Clinton was acting as, shall we say, the sales agent. And when Hillary became Secretary of State, Bill Clinton's speaking fees tripled. How very odd. And a lot of these very lucrative speaking engagements were being paid for by people who were seeking favors from the U.S. State Department. So, little follow the money kind of a situation. Now, as you know, there's a big stink going on about how the Russian uranium company, largest in the world now, was acquiring uranium assets and resources in North America with the support of Hillary Clinton. And they're out there saying it was just the right thing to do. The fact that they donated money to the foundation has nothing whatsoever to do with it. It turns out there was a meeting between the head of this Russian uranium company and Bill Clinton at the Clintons' home in Chappaqua, where all of this was worked out. And for a while, Bill and Hillary Clinton denied there had been any such meeting with a Russian nuclear executive in Chappaqua. But it turns out this executive had a picture of himself and Bill Clinton in front of the Chappaqua House hanging on the wall of his office in his company, and that went public, and now we've got Bill Clinton saying, oh, that meeting, I thought you meant another one. No, yeah, that meeting took place. We didn't talk about anything. We went out and we looked at the birds, yes. So they're already on the defensive on all this stuff. And the point to remember here is, it isn't any one of the scandals that is the issue. It is the plethora, the sheer volume of ongoing corruption going all the way back to the Rose Law Firm in Arkansas that we need to be looking at. Now, as you know, there's a new book coming out that goes into detail about cash for favors in the Clinton State Department. And, of course, Hillary Clinton's machine has gone on the attack against the author, Schweizer. They're saying, oh, he's a GOP shill. He's out there trying to destroy. He hates women and all the rest of that stuff. Forgetting that he also authored a well-regarded book about the older Bush presidents. So he's not partisan on this thing. He did another book about insider trading in Congress that actually led to a new law to curb those abuses. And he's coming out with a book about Jeb Bush later this summer. So he's just out there doing the job that the corporate media should be doing, and they're attacking him for it, saying, oh, if you're attacking Hillary, you're a misogynist, woman-hating, male-chauvinist pig that nobody should listen to. By the way, latest accounting from the public statements issued by the Clinton Foundation, they're only spending about 15% of the money coming in on actual charitable work. And we don't know where the rest of it's going. We also know that the rules for a 501c3 are that you're supposed to spend 51% of the money you take in on charitable works. So it might be time to take a good look at whether or not the Clinton Foundation qualifies for a tax-exempt status. We're going to grab ourselves another phone call. Damien in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing? Your Bill Clinton impersonation is cracking me up. Yeah, as far as those regulations regarding 501c3, does that have anything to do with money laundering and selling drugs for profit? Is that everything?
Well, we know that foundations and front companies are key to the idea of laundering drug money. We've talked about it many times. The whole a big aspect of that Whitewater situation that was going on in Arkansas is they were laundering the drug money that was being made by the CIA's Operation Screwworm, which was the guns down to Nicaragua, cocaine coming back to pay for it all. Everybody's making huge amounts of money off of the deal, and they had to launder it. There were a couple of different mechanisms. One was the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, and they had another little scam that I haven't talked about in a long time where they would basically launder the money through all these savings and loans that then collapsed and had to be refunded, by taxpayer expense. And what they would do is they would deposit the money in the bank, and then somebody would set up a fake front company. They would go in and borrow the money out of the bank, borrow their own money back, pledging their business as collateral, and it was just a shell. The business would collapse, the SNL would collapse, but the CIA's drug runners were still on the books for their original deposit. So they got a refund check from the Resolution Trust Corporation. And with this simple device, they could take $1 million in illegal cocaine money, turn it into $1.8 million in clean laundered money without even sending the money outside the United States and all on the backs of the U.S. taxpayer. That was the big scandal of Whitewater and why the government kept the focus on the gun running, and they didn't want you to know that the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the country, specifically the government and the CIA.
Of course. One thing what I wanted to talk about was just putting things in perspective here. There's so many people that they're all over about, no way, we can't have social welfare, we can't have a national health care system, we can't have Social Security, we can't have that. But we can give plenty of money in subsidies to coal and to oil and to Wall Street and to the banks. So
and Israel.
And Israel. So we've got a lot of, I'm just talking about these institutions here, but exactly. So we've got all these people that are in these positions of corporate power that are in essence really government subsidized employees. So let's call it call the kettle black. Let's call it for what it is. Let's not sidestep anything. A lot of these people, they have jobs and they have salaries because of us taxpayers giving them direct money. Whether it's in the form of direct, here's a stimulus, here's an injection, here's a blank check, or here's a 0% interest loan. But I remember they were reporting how many trillions of dollars. First they said 9 trillion, then 16 trillion as far as the amount of stimulus money and all this went out. If you just did regular basic math, let's say 9 trillion, the small number of 9 trillion, let's just, for small numbers, 300 million people in the United States, you could take $9 trillion and loan every person out $30,000 at a 2% interest loan. And you would make profit on that, and the people would get the money directly.
Oh, exactly. Following 2000, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're going to take a news break.
Okay.
Following 2008, if the U.S. government had moved the money the other way, none of the subsequent economic disasters would have happened. But this is fascism. The rich are supposed to get richer. The poor are supposed to pay for everything, and that's why we're in the mess that we're in. We got to take a break for our news, and we'll be back in a little while. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Now, getting on back to the news here. Boehner is now out there saying the door is open for a House subpoena of Hillary Clinton's email server. Now, I am not sure what Boehner thinks he's doing, because unless Hillary is too poor to hire a computer expert to properly erase the disks on the server, and they've already said we erased them. Here's what we're going to show you for the emails, all on paper, so you can't search them with a computer, and we have erased everything else on that server. Now, we know that normal end users, when they delete a file on their computer, the file is still on the drive, but there is software you can get that will go out and actually overwrite a file on the disk with random noise. And I presume that Hillary has hired somebody to do precisely that. So I'm not sure what Boehner thinks is going to happen with this, unless he's got inside information that, in point of fact, Hillary doesn't know enough about computers to do that. Now, everyone's talking about David Petraeus and his having handled classified documents incorrectly. Basically, the foundation of the U.S. government's legal claims against Edward Snowden. And in the end, Petraeus did not go to jail, and he got hit with a $100,000 fine, which sounds like a lot of money, and to somebody like me, it is. But, according to Speakerpedia, David Petraeus makes over $130,000 every time he gives a speech. So his penalty for mishandling all this classified data with his mistress is basically 2/3 of one of his speeches. He makes an extra speech, he's in the clear. Talk about miscarriage of justice. Now then, I want to talk about this story that's all over the corporate media about the trial of Oscar Groening, the accountant of Auschwitz, and they're making a big deal about it because what they've got here is somebody who will openly say, oh yes, I saw the atrocities, I saw the gas, I didn't take part, but I saw all of it. All of it's true, no question. And they're really pounding on this Holocaust stuff this week, either to prop up what has been a collapsing story, or, and this is my concern, Israel, once again, is getting ready to do something really tacky. Either go in and carry out another one of their genocides against the Gazans, or attack Iran. And they're pounding Holocaust, 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 Holocaust in order to try and get political cover. But I did a little digging about this Oscar Groening, and it turns out he's the darling of the pro-Holocaust media. He's made a career out of starring in the media propaganda about the Holocaust going back to the 1990s. He was on the BBC Auschwitz series back in 2005. He was on another one on PBS. He gets interviews in all the corporate media, and he has been well rewarded with media attention and who knows what all else for going on out there and basically saying, oh yes, I was there, I saw it all. Now, this whole idea where they're calling him the accountant of Auschwitz, I have a feeling what's going to happen is they're going to let him get up there and say, yes, I saw it all. I was a witness. The Germans did everything that Israel says they were doing. And then they're going to say, well, he wasn't actually part of it, and they're going to let him go. But this, they've known about this guy, in theory, since the 1990s, and they're only putting him on trial today. And if you go back and look, this guy is the media star. You remember back in the 1990s, the militant feminism, and women were just willing to say anything about any insane gang rape plot because they'd get 15 minutes on Oprah or Donahue. This is more of the same thing. People who are addicted to media attention, they'll say whatever they think the media wants to hear to get on the camera, and that's what this guy's been doing. And he's made a career out of it. This is just more of a fraud, and I think all of this attention on, again, they're wagging the Nazis and wagging the Hitler and wagging the Holocaust. I think it signals that Israel's getting ready to do something really, really nasty because it's become a repeating pattern over the last several years. We all get reminded about Hitler and the Holocaust, and then Israel goes out and does something, and everybody says, well, look at what Israel's been through, and I guess we can look the other way. And they do it time and time again. Now, there's another story coming out of Italy. It was mentioned briefly on their SRN news break where terror suspects were planning an attack on the Vatican. Now, the actual plan was back in 2010. And they're saying, well, they've arrested all these people, including 2 of the bodyguards for Osama bin Laden, and that's the giveaway right there. We all know the real Osama bin Laden died of natural causes in late 2001. We've posted his funeral notice. It appeared all over the world, everywhere except the Western media. All of the subsequent Osamas were fakes, including the guy they killed at Abbottabad. So these bodyguards for Osama bin Laden are also fake. And it looks like what was being planned in 2010 was they were going to attack the Vatican, frame Muslims for it, to try and enrage Christians into a new unholy crusade against the Muslims. So that's what's going on there. I'm sure you've all heard of the School of the Americas. Has a very vile reputation, where it was basically America's school for dictators. Because when the U.S. makes a policy of overthrowing other countries and installing puppet governments, they have to train those puppet governments and their torture squads someplace, and it was done at this School of the Americas. Now, they have renamed it because they know the School of the Americas was a sore point for the American reputation. So now it's called the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. And the rebranding doesn't help because they're still putting out these trainees every time they go into a country and they approach the opposition and they say, we will put you in power if you will do what we tell you. And when they get an opposition figure that says, yes, I will sell out my people and my country for a chance to sit on the big chair, the U.S. will then fly the staff of this opposition to the School of the Americans to teach them how to run an oppressive, brutal regime to keep their puppet in power. Now, it hasn't been working all that well lately, but that's basically what they're doing. Alrighty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Dan in Oregon. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dan, are you there? Okay, I guess he's not. I'm going to put him back on hold. Alrighty, now, we've been talking about this open border policy all over the United States, all over Canada, all over Europe, and it's starting to become a major problem for Europe, where there has been this tsunami of refugees fleeing all of these countries the U.S. is making war on. And they're flooding into Europe, and Europe's economy is starting to feel the strain of it. Their economy cannot support all these people. Their infrastructure cannot support all these people. Now they're talking about closing their borders, even to the point of taking military action against these boats bringing refugees across the Mediterranean. And obviously, they need to control the population of their own country, but on the other hand, they're part of the machine that made these people refugees in the first place. The world would be so much better off for ordinary people without all of this covert overthrow, we're going to go in and warp their economy to serve the American empire nonsense going on. Meanwhile, here in the United States of America, according to Refreshing News 99, the administration of Barack Obama is out there trying to pass laws to basically say we have to accept the illegals and treat them as if they're legal citizens of this country. You're not allowed to make up your own mind about that anymore. Absolutely not. You're not allowed to think for yourself. If you think for yourself, the terrorists will win. It's amazing. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break. When we come back, the situation in Baltimore is starting to get dangerously close to spinning out of control, and I would like to urge caution for everybody. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Somebody just mailed me an article pointing out the fact that, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Ford Motor Company is having to let workers go because of declining sales. It turns out it's the exact same auto factory where Barack Obama made his speech celebrating the comeback of America's automotive industry. So a little bit of an embarrassment there. Okay, looks like we have Dan in Oregon has come back. Dan, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, Mike.
Okay, what is on your mind?
Basically, I want to add a little information in regards to Petraeus. A lot of people don't realize that he pleaded guilty to misdemeanors. If he pleaded guilty to a felony, he would have lost his military retirement because it's one of the stipulations that they have. And secondly, in regards to Obama, the car manufacturing, visiting there, the car manufacturers were making battery-run cars, the new energy type of thing. That was that specific factory for that. But anyways, those are my 2 points, and I'll get off now.
All right, well, thank you very much for that information. And, they've treated Petraeus with kid gloves. You know, justice is not blind in this country. She's a cheap whore whose price is known and payable on demand. All righty, getting on back here. Now, we want to talk about what's going on in Baltimore. As you know, there was this horrible tragedy where a suspect was arrested, was seen and videoed, perfectly healthy, in handcuffs, got into a police car. And then all of a sudden turns up with 80% of his spinal cord severed. And the only place you can really do that is the bottom of the neck. Neck injury, cervical fracture. And apparently somebody saw him being moved from the police car, put in leg irons, and thrown in the back of a van, face down, with his hands handcuffed behind his back. And the next thing, he's dead. People are very, very angry. And what has come out now in this story, this is coming out of counterpunch.org. It appears the police have a little trick they like to do called the nickel ride. This is where they will take a prisoner, handcuff the hands behind the back, put them in leg irons, put them in the back of the van, and then drive the van aggressively to jail so that the prisoner is just bouncing around the back. They think it's great fun. The Philadelphia police got caught doing it. And it appears that the same thing was being done over in Baltimore. This is just, it's fun. You're a suspect. We got you all trussed up here. We're going to put you in the van and just let you rattle around on your way down there to prison. And, of course, if he hits the side of the van with his head, the possibility of a neck fracture is very, very real. And this probably explains why Baltimore is refusing to release any information about their investigation to what's going on. They've put the 6 involved officers on temporary suspension. But protesters in Baltimore are saying there needs to be an explanation for how somebody who's in perfect condition when he's taken into custody somehow winds up dead. And it doesn't help because we're well into protests in the streets, and now the Baltimore police are trying to describe the protesters as a lynch mob. You're out there to lynch the police. We're here to serve the public. There are unanswered questions about what's going on here. And it's not a race issue, even though the corporate media continues to try and spin it. Oh, these officers were white and this suspect was black. It's an issue of police brutality because we know that far more white people are being wrongfully killed by the police than blacks because of the negative media attention. Now, there's this U.S. Marshal, Matthew Fogg, was being interviewed by Ben Swan. And he's basically saying that this Freddie Gray death highlights there's some real problems with law enforcement in the United States. Yes, there are. And they have to be dealt with. We expect the government to deal with it. If they won't, then obviously government has broken down. And it's time to take our government to the old cash for clunkers program, where we take this old, expensive, inefficient, wasteful government, we drop it in the little trash masher over at the junkyard, and we get a check for $50,000 to buy a new, smaller, more efficient, more cost-effective government. We need a program like that right now. Now, there's a very alarming article over in the Real News where they're saying that civil disobedience is now necessary to protect the victims of police brutality. Well, it sounds really good, and I know a lot of people think the time is now, but you need to remember the U.S. government wants riots. They could use riots to declare a national emergency, martial law, suspend the rest of the Bill of Rights, start gun confiscation. So if you're in a protest against police brutality, and yes, you have every right to be there, please keep it cool and calm. And remember, that smelly kid with the dynamite trying to talk you into blowing up a building is probably an FBI informant. So treat them accordingly. Now, attention continues to focus on Southgate in Southern California, where a U.S. Marshal was caught on video just walking up to a law-abiding citizen, taking her camera and just flinging it onto the pavement to smash it. This town is raking in millions of dollars from the federal forfeiture rules. They're taking more money in this little tiny town than the entire city of San Francisco. We're in a state where the police are pillaging the population of law-abiding citizens. Here in Hawaii, we had one. Now, we have the worst traffic congestion of any state in the United States. That's even admitted to by the U.S. Department of Transportation. Gridlock is a fact of life. And apparently there was a big stink because there was a traffic jam in Honolulu. The cars were not moving, and the cops were just walking down the cars, writing tickets for anybody who was using a cell phone. Because using a cell phone without a headpiece is a $290 ticket here in Hawaii. They raked in $18,000 in traffic fines in the space of just half an hour. And here's where it gets really, really interesting. A lot of locals were saying the cops were exploiting the traffic situation because if you're stuck in gridlock, it doesn't matter if you're using your cell phone to check the maps to see where the congestion is, to possibly notify somebody that you're going to be late. And the cops were just taking advantage of the situation to write out the tickets. But get this, the Honolulu Police Department is saying this operation was planned in advance. In other words, they sat down and said, next time there's a traffic jam, let's go on out and write tickets for people trying to use their cell phones. Something to keep in mind if you're thinking about having a vacation here in Hawaii. And of course, over in Tulsa, they're still looking into this old man who was allowed out to pretend he was a police deputy. He was very, very wealthy, was giving the police department stuff, and apparently didn't behave like a decent police officer anyway, but it was protected because he was very generously giving stuff to the police departments. It's completely out of control. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're still talking about stinky badges. Now, down in Orlando, police officer Peter Delio has been arrested and charged with felony battery, and it arises out of an incident where there was a suspect arrested for skipping out on a $60 bar bill. Yeah, you shouldn't do things like that. Got arrested, was in a holding cell at the Orlando Police Department, and this police officer, for whatever reason, just kneed him hard in the abdomen, rupturing his spleen. Now, the man whose spleen was ruptured came back later and said, I was trying to get medical attention and they were ignoring me, and he's had complications and medical bills. And Officer Delio said, no, I asked him if he wanted a doctor, and he said no. And the surveillance video supported the prisoner. Delio just kneed him in the abdomen hard and then ignored this guy's pleas for medical attention for 1.5 hours. That is a serious interval of time when you're dealing with a ruptured spleen. Now then, let's see. Another story out of Florida. This is going back to 2013, but they finally got around to releasing the video. Florida Sheriff's deputy was following a man on a bicycle. The man got off the bicycle and approached the officer holding a cell phone in his hand. Officer shot him 4 times. Now, we have a video from Washington State, linked to the front of whatreallyhappened.com. It's from Kennewick. And it's basically somebody got a confrontation between a Kennewick police officer and a citizen. And what is alarming is the attitude displayed by the police officer of total arrogance and domination and I'm in charge and you shut the heck up. At one point, he's literally saying that if he wants to, he can go into the police department's computers and change the record on this guy, make it look dirty. You got to watch this video because it reveals what the current attitude of these police officers toward the American citizen happens to be. The days of to protect and serve seem to have been gone for a very, very long time. Now then, apparently the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and I've always wondered, why did this one gang of people get to play with all the fun stuff? But be that as it may. Apparently, as they collect gun ownership data, they have been taking note of the race of gun owners. And apparently that is considered a tacky no-no. There's a new bill that is wending its way through the Congress that will say the ATF can keep gun collection statistics on the population as a whole, but not break it down by race. Up in Oregon, to their credit, the local sheriffs there, Grant County Sheriff Glenn Palmer, is out there opposing the new gun registry bill going through the Oregon legislature. And a lot of other sheriffs across the state are standing with him, saying that this registration bill opens the door of law-abiding citizens being charged and prosecuted for acts they have done in the past. It's a violation of ex post facto. And these people have not caused any damage to the community. This is simply criminalizing ownership of certain items, not the actions committed with them. And that is a major transition that I'm old enough to have seen in our society. Because when I was a young person, actions were punished. Crimes were punished. They didn't criminalize your owning certain things because you might do something bad with them. Now we're in an age where merely owning certain things is a crime, punishable by prison. Owning certain software that might be used to peek into somebody's copyrighted software. Owning certain guns because you might use them badly. Owning certain chemicals because they might lead to the manufacture of drugs. It's completely out of control. It really, really is. Alrighty, getting on back to human-caused global warming. And yes, it's snowing in Boston. And let's see, this is April 24th, and it's snowing in Boston. As that caller said, was snowing in Pennsylvania. Yesterday, snow in 23 of the 50 states here. Snow is falling out in the Sierras in Washington State. And all of this is a prelude to a very interesting article that came out today in Newsmax. Now, up until now, we've been hearing this drumbeat, oh, March 2015, hottest year on record, scorching warm all over the place. Well, I guess they've realized they're raising on a busted flush with snow still falling all over the place here. So now they're releasing this study done by Duke University that's saying, well, global warming has slowed, which is putting it mildly, but it could heat up again. In other words, they're saying, don't let all these cold winters fool you. Global warming's going to come back. It's going to come back the instant you refuse to pay a carbon tax here. Yeah, of course, the climate could heat up again because climate always changes. There has never been a time in the 4 billion plus year history of planet Earth when climate wasn't changing. And yes, it's always getting warmer, then it gets colder, then it gets warmer, then it gets colder. This is called the ice ages and the interglacials. So it's easy for the global warming Nazis to go on out there and say, well, yes, maybe we've got all this snow and ice, but it'll get warmer eventually. Yeah, that's true. We agree with that. The issue is it really the result of human activity, justifying taxation and further draconian controls over our lifespan, or is it changes in solar output and the changing shape of the Earth's orbit? Both factors way beyond the control of Al Gore and his ilk to manipulate. Needless to say, the weather on the mainland is not going to be very good. Thunderstorms set to strike across the U.S. Possibility of tornadoes days after snowfall hits the north. And they had a tornado this morning in Florida. We had a tornado here in Hawaii yesterday, out on the western part of Oahu. We do get them out here. A few years ago, we had one actually touch down on the street outside where we live and ripped up a tree. So we get all of that stuff. Now, looking at the radar, right now, it's kind of a bizarre situation. We got some serious intense weather off to the northwest. We got some serious intense weather off to the southeast. And right now, Oahu is in this narrow corridor of clear, wonderful air. And it's a little hazy out there, but otherwise, definitely tourist weather. All right, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Connor up in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, yeah. Hi. So, what do you think about this year's NHL draft?
Well, I'm opposed to the draft here, and I think they all ought to go out to Canada and avoid being put into combat. Okay?
Right.
All right. Talk to you later. We're coming up here on another commercial break here. This is not a sports program for people, okay? That's absolute nonsense here. I'm not a big fan of football anyway. The sports I was into were things like archery and fencing and that sort of thing. And I think my distance from football goes back to my high school days when I was a photographer for the yearbook and the campus newspaper. And I was covering the football games, and I got tackled. And I've sort of been cool on football ever since then here. All righty, we're coming up on another break on commercials. A little bit of bad news, unfortunately. Claire has informed me she's not going to be able to make hour number 3 of our show because of other things that are happening within her very busy and copious life. So we're going to go through the third hour just with me and your phone calls, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a listener just sent me an email pointing out rather ironic circumstance. We ran a story at the What Really Happened website about 900 McDonald's closing, and they were pointing out at the top of the page of the article was an ad for McDonald's free coupons. Oh, my goodness. These things can be so funny. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a quick phone call here. We're going to go to Al in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just wanted to call up and talk a little bit about, this CO2 cycle, the balance in temperature that we can see from ice core samples. It's called balance, right?
Well, that's kind of a romanticized concept that they like to put on nature, that there's a natural balance of nature. There isn't. Nature is chaos. Nature is confusion.
Well,
nature is careening off the walls down the corridors of time here. Well, there are cycles that tend to have natural stability. One of them is carbon dioxide versus green plants, because as CO2 goes up, plants grow faster, absorb more CO2, produce more food. And so it's a naturally self-balancing cycle.
And it is a self-balancing cycle. And I'm lucky enough to live in Ontario, where our premier has saw fit to hit us with a carbon tax. I don't know why. It was a really stupid thing to do, but hey, what can I say? They'll try and fleece you any way they can.
That's right.
But getting back to this little cycle we can see in the core samples. I mean, this happens. This happens every day in society, and people don't even realize it. If you walk into any building that has heating or cooling, as the temperature goes up, a thermostat will say, "Well, we got to heat or cool." Or, sorry, we got to cool, and so the cooling will happen, and the temperature goes down.
Okay, well, can I back up here a little bit?
At that point, but
can I back up here a little bit? Okay,
sure.
When we're talking about the ice core data, this was a big issue that Al Gore raised in his mockumentary Inconvenient Truth. where when you pull out to a large scale, there's a very obvious correlation between increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide and global temperature. And Al Gore said it means that when CO2 goes up, it will drive the temperature up. And everybody said, huzzah, 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 here's the Nobel Peace Prize for your outstanding work. But
it's not how it works.
It's not how it works. If you actually went in there and looked at the ice core data closely, you see that what happens is temperature goes up first, and then about 800 years later, carbon dioxide starts to increase. And what's going on is, as the world gets warmer, life blooms and produces more CO2. Al Gore inverted the relationship in order to sell you the idea that carbon dioxide was a bad thing and you needed to buy and sell his carbon credits and so forth and so on, because he wanted to be the world's first carbon billionaire. And this is one of the major points that the government of Britain now insists has to be read to school children before they're shown Inconvenient Truth. Because the British courts determined there were at least 11 completely bogus claims made by Al Gore, and rather than simply ban the film outright, they said, if you're going to show this in a classroom, you have to precede it by saying, on these 11 points, the following film is incorrect.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, when you look at the ice data, there are other things involved too, such as, unforeseen volcanic eruptions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, solar cycles and the changing shape of the Earth's orbit. Anyway, listen, Al, I got to let you go. I'm sorry to cut you off here, but we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I wanted to get one more phone call in from John in Barbados. Aloha, John. John, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Continuing on this vein of global warming, I really do wish you climate deniers would stop calling it snow. It's global warming powder.
Absolutely, I love it. It's global warming dandruff.
Something like that, yeah. But I mean, if you look at the actual cycle, as the climate warms under natural conditions, and then it increases the CO2. One of those increases is because CO2 cannot stay in solution with water at such high concentrations, the higher the water temperature. So
well, yeah, that's why warm soda pop fizzes much more actively when you take the top off than cold. But that's not just true of CO2. That's true of a lot of gases. That dynamic suspension is based on temperature, and the warmer water is, the more quickly it will give up not only carbon dioxide but oxygen, nitrogen that's dissolved in it, and that's a known physical situation here. But what's really going on as the world gets warmer is life becomes much more abundant. The life on the land, the animal life, produces more carbon dioxide in the land and in the ocean. The plants grow faster to absorb that carbon dioxide and produce more food, and the world becomes abundant, filled with life. This was the reason during the Roman warming period and the medieval warming period, there was so much food growing around that people had time left over for architecture, art, engineering, music, unfortunately, conquest and war. But the flowering of Roman and Renaissance civilization ties in with these periods of a warmer Earth. And these are actually good things. But the carbon Nazis don't want you to realize that. They've been caught going into Wikipedia and rewriting the articles to say, oh, the Roman warming period was a time of terrible tribulation. And they're just trying to Orwellize that past history to keep on pushing this agenda of human-caused global warming. And right now, of course, they're dealing with a major problem. Back in 2000, they were all out there saying that because of human-caused global warming, snow and ice were a thing of the past. And they felt that was a confident prediction because when this whole global warming nonsense got started in 1990, the world was getting warmer. Okay? And so they said, well, we'll just get in, we'll claim this is all the fault of humans, the world will get warmer, and we'll all get rich off of this deal. And then, of course, Mother Nature basically turned around, went the other way, which led to the fraud going on out there, hide the decline, rigging the data, rigging the computer codes. But the one thing they can't rig is the fact that people on planet Earth, here in the Northern Hemisphere, now down in the Southern Hemisphere, are looking at what's going on and saying, hey, this isn't global warming. We're getting record cold, record snow, record ice. And now the carbon Nazis are out there saying, well, didn't we tell you warmer world means more snow and cold and ice and all these lame excuses they've had, like the heat is hiding in the bottom of the ocean, the warm blob in the Pacific, that's where all the heat is concentrated. And for anybody who understands even the basics of science, all of this stuff is extraordinarily ridiculous. But all of these corporate media outlets, these agencies, these scientists, they have basically bet their reputations and credibility on human-caused global warming, and now they can't think of a graceful way to get out of it and still keep their reputation intact, except, of course, for this Duke University study, which is saying, well, okay, global warming has slowed down. Actually, it hasn't. It's reversed. But it could come back in the future, which is a valid statement. Given that how climate operates, yes, at some point, if you wait long enough, the world will get warmer again.
Well, I think my own opinion is, until they know how many volcanoes, including the ones under sea, that huge eruption in Chile that's going on even now will change the climate far more than any human activity that's ever existed.
Oh, absolutely. We've got this volcano down on the Big Island. It's been erupting now for going on 20 years. And every day it puts out more greenhouse gases than all the automobiles in the United States of America put together. But I don't see Al Gore running up the side of that mountain with a giant cork and a tax bill, because volcanoes are too smart to fall for a carbon tax.
I would think so. Yeah, but that thing now is going to be contributing to cooling. It's putting that much ash into the atmosphere.
The one in Chile, absolutely. I'm expecting to start seeing spectacular sunsets here. I remember when I lived in Southern California and Pinatubo blew, and we just had the most amazing sky colors at sunset. And, volcanoes are just going to do what they're going to do. They could care less what humans think about themselves. And so anyway, we're coming up here on the top of the hour news break. So, John, I'm going to let you go. And, yeah, human-caused global warming is a gigantic hoax to trick you out of your money and your obedience. It is not even scientific anymore. The claims get more and more hysterical. We've got defenders of the orthodoxy out there saying that climate deniers ought to be jailed, ought to be killed in some cases. That's not science. That's dictatorship. We got to take a break for the news. When we come back, hour number 3, more about fracking and earthquakes. It may hit you in the wallet in ways you did not expect. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, ready to answer the phone. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to disappoint everybody, but the lovely lady Claire had some other stuff come up and has had to bow out of doing the show this week. She'll be back next week, and she sends her apologies to everybody. Now then, we're going to talk a little bit about fracking, which a lot of people are very upset with, and it's growing evidence of links to earthquakes. And we know that Texas is now out there saying that the recent increase in seismic activity is clearly regionally linked to these fracking wells. Same thing in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is now saying, officially recognizes that the fracking is causing quakes in their state. Tuesday, scientists from Southern Methodist University came out with their own report. It's just growing because you're getting this sudden swarm of quakes in areas that have no prior seismic activity, and it's always clustered around these fracking fields. And we know there's always a danger pumping liquids down into earthquake fault areas. That was actually discovered many, many years ago in Southern California, out at 29 Palms, military base there. They decided to use a convenient earthquake fault to dispose of toxic wastewater, and they started pumping it down there, and all of a sudden they started getting earthquakes. Of course, you're pumping a lubricating fluid under pressure. It doesn't take a lot of pressure to start really getting those rock plates to separate. It's like the little pedal on the bottom of the barber chair or beauty shop chair. You pump it, and one leg you're lifting a much heavier person. It's hydraulics, okay? Now then, the U.S. Geological Survey, in their latest round of maps, are starting to indicate what they're calling induced quakes on the map. And the reason this is of concern to everybody is when you own a home and you go out for insurance on your home, The insurance companies look at geological maps to assess the risk of your home. Is it in a floodplain? Is it on alluvial fill versus bedrock? And while they may not include insurance damage in your policy if you live in an earthquake zone, they know that over time, small earthquakes will physically weaken the structure of your home, increasing the risk of something happening they'll have to pay for. And so everybody who's living in these fracking zones are going to start seeing their home insurance premiums start to go up because of the fracking. We might start seeing exactly the same thing with health insurance. If you're living in an area of fracking, they're not going to be towing the propaganda that the water there is safe to drink. They're going to be saying they're drinking water that contains benzene and all this other stuff. They're going to have health issues. We've got to raise their health insurance premiums to cover the losses from this fracking contamination. And so you, who are not even part of the fracking industry, will be paying additional costs to support the fracking industry. We just put up another story at whatreallyhappened.com about how U.S. coal companies are selling coal back and forth within their own corporations in order to maximize federal government coal subsidies. They're not actually selling the coal to end users. They've just got this company here, sells it to this company over there, sells it back, and they get subsidies for the transaction. They're just ripping off the taxpayers left and right. Speaking of volcanoes, and by the way, the photos of that volcano in Chile, they are spectacular. And yes, people, are at risk. They're getting a huge ash coating all over there. And remember, when they talk about volcanic ash, it's not ash in the sense of what you get in your fireplace from burning wood or paper. Volcanic ash is finely powdered glass particles, and you do not want to breathe it. And even worse, if it builds up on the roof of your home, you've got to keep it clear, because it is very heavy. It is much heavier than snow. And certainly when we were seeing Mount St. Helens erupt in Washington State, people who were not being careful about that volcanic ash, their roofs caved in from that. Especially if there's a little bit of rain to sort of glue it all together, and it just sticks up there. Got to be very, very careful about that. Now, the warnings set aside, it is spectacular to see nature on display this way. Okay. Now, this brings us to Yellowstone, the supervolcano there, Earth's largest. And geologists can look at that part of the United States and see the scars from multiple eruptions of the Yellowstone supervolcano. A lot of people are concerned it's going to happen again, and yes, that's true. Sooner or later, we don't know when. It's going to happen again. And geologists were looking at the past signs of eruption and saying, well, boy, those were really big. And the current magma chamber that we know about can't support a supervolcano eruption quite that large. So they've done another study using seismic waves from earthquakes over time, and they have discovered there is a second magma chamber below the one they already know about. It is so large that all of the magma in it could fill the entire Grand Canyon structure 11 times over. That is a lot. So I have a question. We now know that the magma chamber underneath Yellowstone is a lot bigger than we thought a few months ago. What happens when some of these fracking wells start fracturing rock leading up to the edge of this magma chamber? Has anybody stopped to think about what might happen then? I don't think we ought to be pricking planet Earth anywhere near any of these magma chambers. But, hey, the frackers are making huge amounts of money. Actually, no, they're not. They're not getting as much oil and gas out of the ground as they thought they were going to, and, of course, oil and gas prices are down, and some of the fracking companies are actually in trouble, which some people may cheer. My concern is that the fiscal realities may tempt them to more reckless actions, like we saw in the Gulf of Mexico with the Deepwater Horizon, when they're drilling down deeper and deeper into higher and higher pressure zones that the technology is not really ready to deal with. Look what happened there. Can you imagine the equivalent of a Deepwater Horizon accident hitting the Yellowstone magma chamber. That ought to keep you up tonight here. Meanwhile, Barack Obama is out there proudly proclaiming that he has set aside more public lands and waters than any other administration in U.S. history. Huzzah, 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 like it's a good thing. It is a theft of your public lands by the federal government to sequester them away, to use those lands and their mineral resources as collateral for government borrowing. They've been playing this scam on you since Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility of the U.S. Federal Reserve note. And all of it is illegal. They're snatching your lands. The public lands of the United States of America are our collected heritage. And the enclave clause in the Constitution makes it clear the federal government may not own or control lands other than what is underneath federal government buildings or federal infrastructure like airports, harbors, and military bases. And the Founding Fathers put that in there because of all the times in history where a government or a king would get into financial trouble, and the first thing they'd say is, well, I own all this land anyway, I'm going to sell it off. And they deliberately put that restriction, the enclave clause, in the Constitution so that the federal government could not get out of their self-induced financial disaster by stealing and selling or lending or leasing your public lands. And yet the government has now been doing that all along. This is why it's important for you to read the Constitution. Actually know what is in there. And not let somebody say, oh, well, the Constitution says this and the Constitution says that. Because everybody rewrites it to suit their own agenda. Common Core was rewriting the Second Amendment. Religious people like to rewrite the First Amendment to say Congress shall pass no laws regarding an institution of religion, and that's not what it says. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you heard on the SRN news break, there is a serious problem with bird flu and turkey farmers up in Minnesota. Governor Mark Dayton has declared a peacetime emergency to deal with the problem. Over 2.6 million birds have already been destroyed trying to keep the infection from further contamination of Minnesota's poultry industry, which is a big part of their nation's economy, and they're very worried about it. And looking at the sudden, almost explosive emergence of this, I'm curious where it came from. Where is bird zero? Because, and I'm not saying this is what happened here, but it's something to think about. There is nothing new with the idea of industrial agricultural sabotage for economic and political ends. A very common dirty trick the United States used to do in South America is they would go down to a government, they would loan that government a whole bunch of money, get them on the debt hook, and then the CIA would go in and introduce a pest to destroy that nation's key agricultural export crop so that they could not pay the debt back and would have to basically become a U.S. vassal state. It has been done before. There's a very interesting movie out called The Good Shepherd, and a lot of it is based on the history of the CIA, including sabotaging of South American coffee plantations with insect infestations in order to keep the coffee business flowing more toward the American sphere of influence. There's a long history of doing that. I would not rule out somebody decided it was time for a little bit of payback, because it does seem like this bird flu infection has just exploded far too rapidly to just be a natural occurrence. Just an opinion, just a guess. I don't have any evidence to support that, but if I were involved in the Minnesota agricultural industry, I'd be asking some questions, doing some epidemiological studies to see just where this came from. Alrighty, I linked to a website for a group called Megasquirt, and I don't see their product as ready for ordinary consumer use yet, but I think it's the beginning of a trend. And what Megasquirt is, it is an open source software-driven fuel injection system for the car, for gearheads who want to work on their own vehicles. Now, right now, today, it is against the law in the United States for owners of modern cars to peek inside the electronics, as the software is protected under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, in theory to protect the software from being stolen and in fact to prevent car owners from finding and disabling government-mandated spyware, remote control, and so forth. Now major car manufacturers, along with John Deere, are trying to go one step further and make it a crime for car and tractor owners to work on their own vehicles at all. Talk about encroaching dictatorship. Now, when I was a farm kid, you survived or not on being able to repair and maintain your own farm equipment. And the new model is absolutely not. You're not allowed to fix that. You don't really own it anyway. You're just licensing it from. You will refer all service to a qualified technician at huge markup. So it almost seems inevitable. We are starting to see the development of open source alternative systems for car owners in which you just take out that entire DMCA protected, malware infested, locked against the owner controller, throw it in the trash bin, and install one you can play with yourself to your heart's content. Now, this is not something for just every American to do. This is something for people who are already experienced gearheads to work on. And I have a personal anecdote to share about this idea about you will refer servicing to the qualified and licensed service people. Many, many years ago, back in the 1980s, I was working on some film in Europe, and in particular at a company called Futura Films in Milan, Italy. And I was there because the company that I really did work for, Robert Abel and Associates, had sold them one of the very earliest 3D computer animation systems, which ran on a computer called the Gould Power Node, which at the time was one of the fastest computers you could get on a medium budget. And we're working on this production. We're trying to meet a deadline, and all of a sudden the computer stops working. Now, we're under contract that we're not allowed to get inside the back of the computer. We must refer servicing to the Qualified Service Center, which was in London. And we call them and say, we've got a breakdown, and they say, we can get somebody there in about 3 weeks. Well past the delivery deadline for the project we were working on. And you don't miss a deadline. That's a company killer. And so what I wound up doing was that we determined it was just one of the cards in the computer that was causing the problem, a card the computer could run without. So I got out my Swiss Army knife. I just bought it for myself up in Munich. And I opened up the Gould Power Node. I removed the card. I re-jumpered the backplane because, plug and play didn't exist. If you took a card out, you had to go into the backplane and move all the jumpers around. Put it all back together, got it up and running. We made our deadline. Years later at a SIGGRAPH, the head of Gould Europe was introduced to me, and I saw this funny look on his face and said, "You were in Milan, weren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "You took apart one of our computers with a Swiss Army knife." So the story followed me around for quite a little bit. And it's humorous and it's funny and it had a happy ending. But, the idea that we're not allowed to work on and fix, when necessary, equipment we bought and paid for, that is definitely the sign of a fascist dictatorship at work. All righty, let's see. Looks like we have a caller on the line. I'm going to go ahead and grab this before the commercial break. Dennis, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dennis, are you there? Okay, I cannot hear Dennis, so I'm going to go ahead and put Dennis back on hold. Seems to be some issues with our phone system today. Now then, talking about vaccines and mandatory vaccines, the ACLU has now come out saying that the mandatory vaccine law in California and anywhere else is unconstitutional. And they're absolutely right. The government does not have the authority to come in and tell you to take medications you don't want. It's actually even in the Nuremberg Code. Since the end of World War II, medical treatment may not be given without the consent of the person being treated. And over in Vermont, they're getting ready to vote to end vaccine exemptions. You will have all your shots or you can't go to school. You will buy this product whether you want it or not. You will buy this product even if it's harmful for you because we're the government and we decide these things for you. It really is getting silly. And this is not about your health. This is about forcing you to buy more products from the pharmaceutical companies so that they can stay in business, not go bankrupt, and write generous campaign checks for the politicians. We are totally gone into fascism right now. And this desire to just keep making the payments on all this debt has become the number one priority of government and corporations, and all other considerations are subordinate to that. And we're looking at this article in Russia Today talking about global pandemic. And they're saying the real risk to world health are substandard, bogus medications. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go to the phones here, I got an email from a listener with an article from LiveScience.com. Apparently, there has been a study done trying to figure out why all of a sudden we have this whooping cough epidemic in the United States of America. And the research has concluded that the vaccine manufacturer changed the formula, and that the change in formula is the reason why all of a sudden the vaccine isn't working, and indeed, a lot of the people getting the vaccine are getting whooping cough. Talk about substandard medications. Over the break, I was noticing the big news on Fox News Network here is Abercrombie is going to drop the use of shirtless models in their advertising. Boy, that's what Fox News thinks is important, and then they wonder why they're losing their audience to the independent media. All righty, we're going to go back to the phones and try and reach Dennis in Ohio one more time. Dennis, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. What is on your mind?
A couple years ago, Elon Musk came out and said fuel cells are, quote, so bull bleep. And he used the real word there. And Wednesday, Toyota came out swinging, launched an ad called Driving on Bull Bleep. And if you just search YouTube there, you'll see it. It's an ad featuring a Toyota car that is fueled by bull bleep. And I think you'd enjoy it.
Okay, our phone connection is having some difficulty there. We've been talking about the new hydrogen technology, and I've come around after talking to the gentleman with the hydrogen house. The technological foundation for this is definitely there. Economically, I still don't know if it pencils out, because somehow you have to produce that volume of hydrogen to begin with. And like electric power for electric cars, that always seems to go back to the same old fossil fuel basis that we've had before. So there's definitely a potential. I'm not sure if it's really at the point for wide-scale deployment, and apparently the consumer agrees, because as that caller pointed out, the Ford factory where they just laid off 700 people is the factory that is devoted to these new alternative hybrid cars. And that is a shame. I think hybrids are definitely a way to go. So, Dennis,
They're not, hold it, wait. They're not making fuel cells there at that Ford place.
Okay, Dennis, I cannot hear you. Your phone line is cutting in and out, okay? And I understand you're an enthusiast for the fuel cell cars, and I'm an enthusiast too. I just think there are still some practical considerations getting in the way of wide-scale adoption. So thank you very much for the phone call, and hopefully the phone system's going to clean up, because he was sounding like Johnny Mathis there, cutting in and out on the microphone here. Getting on back to science and health, yet another article linking Roundup chemicals to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and glyphosate. And apparently the study basically concerned farmers who are using these products, who are now getting above normal incidence of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Monsanto is still out there saying, you can't say bad things about our product. You must be deranged. And the danger of these trans-Pacific, transatlantic trade deals is they put decision-making for these products in the hands of the corporations themselves, and takes the authority away from local governments to say, hey, we think this is dangerous and we don't want it here. And one more time, look at what's going on down on Maui, where 5 months ago the Maui voters said, we don't want experimental GMO crops on this island. And because of political machinations and a couple of corrupted judges, the GMO experimental crops are still growing down there. Who cares what the voters want? The voters don't matter anymore. Rise of the corporate state is what's going on here. Shades of rollerball. Back in November of 2014, House Republicans actually passed a law forbidding scientists from advising the EPA. And basically said from now on the EPA has its own board of experts which have these overt financial ties to the industries affected by EPA regulations, and outside scientists are just not allowed in anymore. It really is completely out of control. Now, you may have already heard about this, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Apparently, in fact, on the SRN break, I guess they're either looking for or they found who was responsible. Somebody landed a drone, a little tiny drone, on the roof of the Japanese Prime Minister's office this week, up on the helipad. Upon investigation, it was found to be carrying a tiny container of radioactive cesium, which they think is from Fukushima. That's got to be making them all nervous, because the Prime Minister's office, along with TEPCO and GE and all these other people, were saying, it's no big deal. It's not a lot of radiation. You know, remember when Ann Coulter was out there saying a little radiation's actually good for you? I mean, talk about a whopper on that one. And the reality is that radiation has been toxifying our planet. I mean, going back to the days of nuclear testing. A lot of that radioactivity is still blowing around on the breeze. If you have the necessary equipment, you can pull down air samples and say this isotope came from the Crossroads test, and this is from Operation Upshot Knoll Hill. It's still out there. Which leads us to this story about how we're seeing the beginnings of a collapse of the Pacific Ocean food chain. And they're talking about the emergency shutdown of West Coast fisheries. Their populations have crashed 91%. And I love this quote in the article. The cause of the problem is a mystery to scientists who claim they can't pinpoint how or why it's happening. Probably because if they do pinpoint it, there's going to be financial repercussions. Funding will be cut. Is Fukushima to blame? Could very well be. Fracking runoff? Could very well be. All of this unmetabolized birth control hormones that American women are taking and flushing into the toilet and goes out to sea because the sewage treatment plants don't remove it, that could be a factor as well. There's evidence to support that. But it's rather amazing to see all these environmentalists running around screaming about our plastic bags and our quality of life, but you never see them going after the real causes of damage. Nuclear waste, fracking waste, toxic waste, uncontrolled use of pharmaceuticals going into the environment. They never talk about that. Oh, yeah, dolphin-safe tuna. That's basically where they are here. And it's not just Fukushima. There is a huge problem over on the coast of Somalia, which has for some reason become a dumping ground for radioactive waste in that part of the world. And what have been called the Somalia pirates are actually local citizens groups trying to patrol their coast to prevent illegal dumping. And when they catch somebody dumping toxic radioactive waste in their water, they will take them prisoner and say, we're charging you a fine for pollution of our coast. And the rest of the Western world say, oh no, they're pirates, they're holding them for ransom, it's hijacking. Because you're not allowed to protect your coast from toxic waste. We, the rulers of the world, the bankers, have decided that Somalia will be the dumping ground for all of these chemicals, and you really have no right to refuse, because you're just Somalia, after all. Now, somebody sent me an article out of the Waking Times, shocking aerial footage of the Amazon forest in Peru. And they're talking about this massive deforestation that's going on, which has been going on for a long time. Nothing new there. But what was interesting is I went to the coordinates in the article using Google Earth, and it was clear. Google Earth is modifying the images, not too cleverly, trying to hide the scale of the deforestation, make it look like it's still primarily green. We posted those results to the front page of what really happened. We'll be back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. And we're seeing now that the Pepsi company, responding to the public concerns, is going to stop using aspartame in their Diet Pepsi and replace it with Splenda. I'm not sure that's really an improvement, but they're hoping that the public will say, all right, no more aspartame. We can go back to Diet Pepsi, because their sales aren't doing very well either. Let's see, getting on down here. As you know, Monsanto is in high dudgeon against the World Health Organization for daring to suggest that glyphosate might actually be bad for human health, even though the science continues to pile up. And it's kind of weird where people are finally realizing that companies will put out bad products because it's cheaper to put out a bad product and then hire a public relations firms to convince you it's okay than it is to make a safe product. And Splenda is another example. I was researching Splenda online, and I saw a lot of very serious articles about toxic effects of Splenda, followed up by Snopes.com. Oh, it's all just a rumor. It's completely inadequate. The Splenda is good for you. You can bathe in it. You can wash your car in it, and all the rest of this other stuff. And that's why it's so important for people to learn to trust themselves, to become their own best analysts. I don't need to tell you what to think. I have every confidence you know how to think for yourselves. Just go on out, look at the available information, decide for yourself, and you and the nation will be better off. The United States practically invented the public relations industry, which is a very fancy term for lying for money. Because 9 times out of 10, that's what public relations is all about. Advertising is under a lot more constraints. They more or less have to tell the truth. If they're caught lying, they will get sued. Public relations, the gloves are off. That's why it was a public relations firm that came up with that story about stolen Kuwaiti incubators that got us into that first mess in Iraq. That's what they do, whether you call it public relations or spin doctoring or propaganda. Now, getting on back to Monsanto and GMO, U.S. farmers are being driven out of business by GM crop contamination. We know that some corn exports to China have plunged 80% because farmers who think they've grown a natural organic crop, they'll ship it over there to China. China will test it and say, GMO, we refuse this shipment. Those wheat farmers up in Oregon are trying to sue over their natural wheat crops being contaminated by GM pollen. And at this particular point here, the organic natural food market in the United States is growing by leaps and bounds. People don't want the frankenfood. And it's reached a point where those stores who provide natural organic food are having to import it from other countries because there's almost none of it left here in the United States of America. Abbott Laboratories has come under fire for GMO ingredients in their baby formulas. Now, the countries of Brazil and Malaysia have decided to cancel GM mosquito trials. They were just going to put them on out there and let them go, and decided it's simply too dangerous. And a reminder, and here's another example of public relations at work. The story leaked out that Monsanto will not serve genetically modified food in their own cafeteria. Monsanto has since issued a press statement saying, this is complete and utter nonsense. We believe in allowing our employees the maximum choice in their food. There's GMO food there. Whether they eat it or not, we don't know. But there's another article out here in the Daily Bell saying that the free market is starting to solve the GMO problem itself because people don't want these products. That's why they're fighting for GMO labeling. They're looking for alternatives, and this is why Monsanto is trying to use the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnership to make GMO labeling banned in every single country, so you don't know whether you're getting it or not. They don't want you to have freedom to choose. It's another sign of the rising corporate dictatorship in this country here. Neil Young, working together with Willie Nelson, are coming out with a new song album, The Monsanto Years. And this will be and I'm going to buy it. Sight unseen, I'm going to buy this Neil Young, Willie Nelson album because they're writing songs talking about the current crisis with whether or not we are eating healthy. And remember, the government has already declared a desire to eat healthy as a mental illness. Orthorexia nervosa. If you're concerned about the quality of the food you're eating, you're mentally ill and we've got to force a pill or a vaccine on you. Now, a lot of people have been talking about when genetic modification is going to come to humans. intentionally, may have already started happening accidentally. I don't think that we can rule out Morgellons disease as a horrible accident of early genetic technology gone wrong. But apparently over in China, they're now officially acknowledging that they're experimenting with modifying the genome of human embryos. I sure hope it works out. Now here's a very interesting article. This is from the BBC. And for you fans of Top Gear, yes, it will be back next year. 3 brand new presenters and a whole new executive production staff. Complete relaunch of the show. I don't think it's going to do very well at all. Anyway, so this article in BBC, exercise not the key to the fight against obesity. As you know, we have a major obesity problem in the United States of America, and they're always out there selling you exercise machines and health club subscriptions. And this article is basically saying that the issue is what you eat. Are you eating healthy, a balanced diet, or is your diet loaded up with sugars and fats and everything, which is certainly true of the American diet? But it goes beyond that. Here in the United States of America, on a planet beset by famine, food corporations add chemicals to your food that make you want to eat more, because then you will buy more and they will make more money. One of the worst is monosodium glutamate. Now, it's advertised as a flavor enhancer. We're putting it in there because the food tastes better. But what it actually does is it blocks the signal in the brain that says, I have had enough to eat. And so many shoppers are now trying to avoid monosodium sodium glutamate. Manufacturers have resorted to vague euphemisms such as yeast extract and hydrolyzed yeast protein in the ingredients list, in the hopes that you won't realize they're still talking about the same chemical. And then there is aspartame, which I'm glad Pepsi is moving to Splenda. But the problem with aspartame is it causes your body to crave real carbohydrates. It's not actually an aid for dieting. And that's why you'll see these bundled deals in the supermarket. A liter of a diet soda loaded with aspartame coupled with big bags of corn chips. Because you'll drink the soda and you'll just want to eat those corn chips. Then you've got the growth hormones that are put into livestock. And it's not always fully metabolized by the time the dairy products or the meat is harvested. And the unmetabolized portion of those hormones will affect your body the way it affected the original livestock, triggering weight gain. That's okay, we have a pill to sell you here. By the way, not supporting boycott, divestment, and sanctions can be hazardous to your health. The Sabra Hummus Company has had to recall 30,000 cases of their hummus product because of a potential bacterial impurity. Alrighty. Been another oh, there's the music. Time for us to get on out of here and get into the weekend. It's Powhana Friday, and we will be back on Monday here on the Genesis Communication Network. And over this weekend, please make a point of talking about current events with your family and friends and say it's time to really seriously look at what's going on and stop pretending that it's all hidden behind the baseball games and the rest of it. We are in serious trouble, and we, the people, are going to have to fix it. Aloha, America.